In every corner of the world, there are secrets, stories that go beyond understanding, waiting patiently in the dark, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. And tonight, we step into that darkness once again. Welcome to Dynamic Dark. Welcome to a brand new horror experience. Welcome to episode 32. I'm Aditya, and tonight, I bring you 3 terrifying creepypasta-style stories, each darker, deeper, and more disturbing than the last. New stories. New week. New nightmares. If you are new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you dare to face what comes next. Tonight's stories will blur the line between reality and nightmare. Each one a descent into pure darkness. Today's first story, The Doll Collector. 12 o'clock. Today's second story, Shadow in the Frame. New moon symbol. And today's final story, Roommate from Hell. If you crave horror that blends creepypasta chills with psychological terror and haunted realism, you are exactly where you need to be. Because this is Dynamic Dark. For the best experience, put on your earphones, turn off the lights, and let the darkness, suspense, and fear consume you. Now let's begin with our first story, The Doll Collector. She found it hidden under the attic floorboards, a doll unlike any she had ever seen. Its eyes, those glassy, unblinking eyes, seemed to follow her every move. Even as she backed away, the feeling of being watched stayed, crawling up her spine like icy fingers. She reached out hesitantly, touching its cold porcelain hand. The second her fingers brushed it, a shiver ran through her, as though the doll had noticed her touch, as though it had known she was coming. The attic itself was strange. Dust hung thick in the air, particles dancing in the dim sunlight filtering through a cracked window. Cobwebs stretched across old trunks and boxes, catching on her sleeves as she crouched down. The air smelled of old wood, of forgotten memories, and something else. Something faint, almost imperceptible, like a whisper brushing past her ear, gone the moment she turned her head. She tried to laugh it off, telling herself it was only her imagination, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. She studied the doll. Its face was delicate, unnaturally perfect, almost human. Its eyes, dark, glossy, reflected the room perfectly, but also something else. Something wrong. They weren't just watching her, they were waiting. And she had the sudden, irrational thought, waiting for what? Waiting for her. Hours passed as she examined it. Every detail seemed alive, the way the hair fell perfectly, the slight tilt of its head, the curve of its lips, which somehow seemed like a smirk she didn't remember seeing a moment ago. She tried setting it back in the corner, hoping the strange tension would fade. But as soon as she stepped back, she noticed the tiniest change. The doll's eyes had shifted. Just a fraction. Just enough to make her heart leap. The room seemed to hold its breath. Shadows moved along the corners as if they were watching too. And she felt a sudden cold draft, though the window was closed. A creaking sound echoed softly behind her, like footsteps, but she was alone. Her own breathing seemed louder than the silence, and the doll stared. It knew. She didn't know what, but it knew. And with that knowledge, the unease deepened into dread. She tried to leave the attic, but every step seemed slower, heavier, as though the floorboards themselves resisted her movement. Her gaze kept returning to the doll, which seemed to lean slightly forward now, tilting its head ever so slightly, following her. And in that tilt, she saw the faintest, almost invisible smile, just enough to make her question reality. Did dolls smile? Could they? She shook her head, telling herself she was imagining it. And yet, the eyes followed. They always follow. She swallowed hard, heart pounding, and finally made her way down the creaking stairs, trying to convince herself it was just a doll. Just a doll. And yet, she could feel its presence, lingering, patient, and alive in the shadows of the attic, waiting. That night, she placed the doll carefully on the shelf, its porcelain face staring blankly at the corner of the room. The air was still, almost suffocating, carrying the faint scent of dust and old fabric. She told herself it was just a doll, harmless, inanimate, yet something about the way it tilted its head slightly as the moonlight hit its glassy eyes made her shiver. Hours passed. The wind outside howled faintly, rattling the window panes. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the curtains sounded louder than usual, echoing unnaturally in the otherwise silent room. She tried to sleep, pulling the covers tightly around her, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at her. Her eyes darted toward the shelf repeatedly, expecting to see it move, and each time, she convinced herself it hadn't. When she finally drifted into restless sleep, the room seemed to breathe with her. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, curling around corners, forming shapes that didn't belong. Thick black ghosts of varying forms appeared faintly at the edges of the room, low smoky silhouettes gliding just above the floor, elongated humanoid shapes hovering silently, jagged fragmented shadows crawling along the walls, and mist-like clusters swirling slowly with intent. They never fully revealed themselves, but their presence pressed in, making the room feel alive, sentient. Suddenly, she awoke with a start. The moonlight had shifted, and the shadows were different now. Her heart raced as her gaze went to the shelf. The doll was gone. Panic gripped her chest. Slowly, cautiously, she turned her eyes toward her bed, and there it was, sitting upright, staring at her with the same blank, unblinking gaze. Her stomach churned. She hadn't moved it. She hadn't even gotten out of bed. The air thickened, each breath heavy and metallic, carrying faint whispers she couldn't quite understand. The black ghosts shifted closer in the corners, pulsing with intent, their forms ever changing. One moment low and slithering, the next tall and rigid, hollow eyes flickering faintly. The doll seemed almost alive now, tilting its head slightly, its eyes reflecting the faint red glow of the corners of the room. She wanted to scream but found no sound escape her throat. Hours felt like days. Every flicker of the dim lamp cast exaggerated shadows across the walls, making the doll appear to move when she wasn't looking directly at it. Her own reflection in the bedroom mirror seemed wrong, slightly delayed, mimicking her movements too slowly, smiling when she didn't. The shadows of the black ghosts stretched and writhed, curling toward the doll as if feeding from its unnatural energy. By the time dawn approached, exhaustion and terror had merged into a numb dread. The doll remained on her bed, perfectly still, yet somehow impossibly alive. She knew, deep down, that whatever was watching her that night wasn't going to stop. And as the first light of morning barely pierced the gloom, a faint, high. Each night, she noticed it first subtly. The doll wasn't where she left it. At first, just a step forward, barely noticeable in the dim light of her bedroom. She would wake, blink, and for a moment wonder if her eyes were playing tricks. But the next night, it had moved again closer. Inches at first, then more, until it was always in her line of sight. Her heart would hammer in her chest when she woke in the dark. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward the doll, elongating unnaturally, brushing along the walls. The doll's glassy eyes reflected a pale, airy glow, catching what little light there was, and she swore they were watching her. Each night, the movement accelerated slightly. A step, a few more inches, always aligned with where she would be when she woke. She began to dread opening her eyes. Sometimes she would see a faint blur as it shifted, an almost imperceptible tilt of the head, a whisper of motion in the corner of her eye. The room itself seemed alive, reacting to her fear. Floorboards creaked softly under the weight of unseen presences. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through her chest as if the house itself were aware. The doll's proximity amplified every sound, the rustle of sheets, the tapping of a window, the creak of a door, all magnified in the tense silence. She tried ignoring it, pretended it wasn't moving. But the next morning it had shifted again, always subtly, always calculated. Her dread became a constant companion, seeping into every corner of her waking hours. She began noticing shadows that weren't there before, shapes at the edge of vision, dark masses that moved when she wasn't looking directly at them. Sleep became a trial. Her dreams were invaded by the doll's movements, sliding across rooms, sitting on shelves, staring. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Every time she woke, she expected to see it closer, and every time she did. By now, she could no longer remember the room without its looming presence. The doll had become the center of her world at night. She could feel its gaze even before opening her eyes. The movement was no longer gradual, it felt deliberate, intelligent, purposeful. And always, always, in her line of sight. Every night, terror deepened. She knew she was being watched. She knew she was being hunted step by step, inch by inch. And yet, she could do nothing. She could only lie there, frozen, staring at the creeping shadow of the doll as it closed the distance between her and something far darker. She panicked. She tried to hide them, covering the dolls with cloth, locking them in a box, even pushing them to the farthest corner of her room. But no matter what she did, every morning she awoke to find them around her bed. Always in her line of sight. Some perched on the nightstand, some sitting upright on the floor, eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. The air felt heavier each night. Shadows stretched across the walls and ceiling, curling unnaturally toward the dolls, almost protective of them. A low, almost imperceptible hum filled the room, vibrating through her chest. Her heartbeat quickened at every faint sound, a rustle of fabric, a creak from the floorboards, a whisper she couldn't identify. The movement of the dolls became deliberate. One night she saw a slight tilt of a head, another night a subtle shift of an arm. Each morning revealed them closer than the night before. Some even turned to face her bed directly, as though waiting. The room felt alive, every shadow amplifying her fear. Her sleep grew restless. She could feel unseen eyes watching, corners of the room where darkness pulsed, thickening unnaturally. Every time she blinked, she thought she saw one of the dolls inching forward, the black shadows curling and stretching around them. By now, it wasn't just the dolls. The room itself seemed complicit. Air grew cold and heavy, carrying faint metallic echoes and distorted whispers. Even the faintest flicker of light revealed forms she hadn't noticed before, dense black shapes hovering silently, twisting in the corners, pressing on her consciousness with their mere presence. And yet, no matter how terrified she became, she couldn't look away. Every morning confirmed it, the dolls were always closer, always watching, and the thick black shadows that surrounded them seemed to pulse in agreement. A creeping sense of inevitability filled her. She was trapped in a nightmare orchestrated by these unholy toys, the darkness, and the silent, looming figures that thrived in it. That night, she realized it wasn't just one or two dolls anymore, it was hundreds. The shelves overflowed, the dressers, the floor, even the windowsills were filled with porcelain faces that gleamed faintly under the flickering light. The air had grown heavier, almost damp, carrying the faint scent of old perfume and something metallic like rust or blood. At first, she thought she was dreaming. But every breath came with the quiet sound of porcelain joints shifting, tiny heads turning just enough to catch the light. Their glass eyes shimmered, reflecting her fear back at her from every corner of the room. She tried to count them, desperate for control. 10, 20, 50. But the number kept growing. It was as if the room stretched when she looked away, as if the walls themselves birthed new shelves lined with more of them. Each one identical. Each one watching. When she leaned closer, her pulse stopped cold. Their faces weren't random anymore, they were familiar. The eyes, the lips, the trembling shape of fear etched perfectly into each expression, they were hers. Every doll now looked exactly like her. She backed away slowly, hands trembling, and that's when she heard it, a faint tap. Then another. The sound of tiny porcelain fingers brushing against wood. She froze. The dolls were moving, not fast, but in unison, small mechanical shifts that made the entire room creak softly, as if the air itself was filled with motion. The longer she stood still, the louder it became, hundreds of tiny clicks, scratches, whispers blending into a sound that didn't belong in the living world. It was a rhythm, breathing, almost alive. Her reflection in their glass eyes began to distort. Each eye reflected a slightly different version of her, one crying, one laughing, one expressionless. They were mimicking her emotions, feeding on them. The lights flickered once. In that flash, every doll's head had turned toward her at once. She stumbled back, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She whispered, "Stop," but the whisper wasn't hers. It came from them, hundreds of voices, all in her tone, layered together, whispering in perfect sync. She clutched her blanket, gasping, but the air felt thicker now. The walls were moving closer, bending under the weight of their presence. The dolls leaned forward, inch by inch, their necks creaking as one. Then she saw it, in the far corner, one doll still standing perfectly still. Its smile was wider. Too wide. Cracked from cheek to cheek like broken glass. The longer she looked, the more that smile spread across the others too, one by one. And as the cracks deepened, something black began to ooze from within like smoke, or shadow, crawling out from their hollow eyes. She screamed, but her voice was lost in the sound, hundreds of tiny whispers answering back, all repeating the same word in perfect harmony. Her name. And in that moment of realization, she understood the truth. They weren't made for her. The room was silent. Too silent. She could hear nothing but the faint ticking of the clock, though it felt like the sound was coming from inside her skull. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, and then something shifted. A soft scrape of porcelain against wood. Her eyes darted across the room. Dozens of dolls sat motionless, their faces cracked, eyes glimmering faint red in the dim light. But one had changed position. It was no longer on the shelf, it was standing on the floor. Closer. She blinked hard. No, that wasn't possible. They couldn't move. They were just dolls. Just lifeless glass and paint. But then, another sound, a faint tap tap tap. Her gaze snapped to the corner. Another doll had moved. Its head tilted, neck creaking, eyes fixed directly on her. The air grew heavier, colder, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. The lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed to a dull orange glow. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into strange, uneven shapes that didn't match the doll's outlines. She stepped back slowly, heart pounding, every nerve in her body screaming to run. And then, it happened. One doll twitched. Its head rotated with a slow, grinding sound. The body followed, stiffly like a puppet remembering how to stand. Its legs cracked as it straightened, one arm jerking up, then another. She gasped, stumbling backward. The doll took a step. Then another. Behind it, dozens more followed. Their glassy eyes gleamed, their movements jerky but purposeful. The sound of tiny feet scraping the wooden floor grew louder, overlapping with faint whispers, soft, childlike voices murmuring words she couldn't understand. The air pulsed with a strange vibration, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The dolls surrounded her, circling slowly, their heads turning in perfect unison. Her reflection glimmered faintly in their glossy eyes, distorted, fragmented, multiplied 100 times over. Each reflection smiled, wide and wrong. And then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by faint glowing cracks in the dolls' faces. Through the blackness, she could feel them move closer, their presence thick, suffocating, alive. A single porcelain hand reached up from the shadows and touched her wrist. It was ice cold. She screamed, but the sound never reached her ears. It was muffled, pulled away, devoured by the heavy air. The dolls' faces began to change, their features warping, reshaping until every one of them wore her face. Hundreds of identical eyes stared back at her. Hundreds of her own smiles gleamed from cracked porcelain. And in that moment, she understood. The dolls weren't trying to reach her. They were trying to replace her. Today's second story, Shadow in the Frame. He discovered the dusty roll of film tucked away in an old cardboard box, the kind of box that smelled of mildew and forgotten memories. His fingers trembled slightly as he held it, the paper curling at the edges, sticky with age. He couldn't remember who had left it or why it had been there. Back in his dimly lit dark room, the red safe light casting uneven shadows across the walls, he began to develop the photographs one by one. The first print appeared, a grainy image of himself standing in the middle of an empty room. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But then he noticed it, a dark shape lurking behind him. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a smear of developing chemicals. He squinted, holding the photo closer. The shadow was unmistakable, tall, vaguely humanoid, but wrong. Its edges blurred, dissolving into the background like smoke, and yet, somehow, it felt deliberate. As he developed more images, the pattern became terrifyingly clear. In every single photograph, a shadow appeared. Always behind him. Always in a slightly different pose, sometimes leaning closer, sometimes stretching upward, sometimes just watching. He could feel its gaze through the grainy image, cold and patient, like it had been waiting for him all this time. The room around him seemed to tighten, walls pressing slightly inward. The faint hum of the safelight felt louder, vibrating against his chest. Each photo developed only made his heart beat faster. His own reflection in the glass of the photo tray seemed distorted, elongated, shadowed in ways he couldn't explain. He dropped the next photograph onto the pile and stepped back, feeling the hairs on his neck rise. The shadow's movement in the pictures wasn't random. It was deliberate. Watching. Anticipating. And somehow, it felt as if it could step out of the frame at any moment. At first, he told himself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a shadow from the corner of the attic. He glanced at each photo, scrutinizing every frame, trying to convince himself that his mind was playing games. But the more he looked, the harder it became to deny the truth. The figure was there. Always. In the earliest shots, it was faint, almost blending into the background, a dark silhouette standing behind him in the doorway, its edges hazy as if it wasn't fully in the world. But with each subsequent photo, it crept closer. Closer to him, closer to the lens, and closer to his reality. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized it wasn't just following him in the pictures, it was aware of him. Watching, waiting, calculating. He tried developing the roll of film faster, almost desperate to finish, but the anticipation only heightened his unease. Every click of the developing machine felt like a heartbeat echoing in the silent attic. He noticed details he hadn't before, the shadow's form shifting slightly, elongated arms stretching unnaturally, a vague grin that appeared for only a fraction of a second, then disappeared. Each new photo added layers to the horror. Shadows in the room seemed to mimic the figure's movements. Faint whispers echoed when he wasn't speaking, and the air felt heavier, pressing down on him as though the darkness in the frame had spilled into reality. He started seeing it in reflective surfaces too, mirrors, windows, polished wood always behind him, always closer than before. The terror became obsessive. He couldn't put the camera down. He couldn't look away from the developing sheets. The figure's proximity in the photos felt deliberate, intelligent, malevolent. Every frame revealed more than the last, shapes twisting in the corners, eyes flickering in the dark, shadows that moved independently of any known source. By the end, he realized that the attic wasn't just a place of memories, it had become a stage. And the figure, emerging frame by frame, was no longer confined to the photos. It was here, patient, looming, waiting for the moment he could no longer deny its presence. He spun around, heart pounding, toward the mirror leaning against the attic wall. At first, it seemed ordinary, just a pane of glass reflecting the cluttered room. But then, movement caught his eye. The figure. Not in the photo this time, but there. Its form stretched unnaturally, dark and heavy, edges flickering like smoke. He froze, every muscle locked, unable to look away. The figure mimicked him, but in ways that no human could. Its arms elongated slightly, bending at impossible angles, its head tilted unnaturally, and the faintest, most sinister grin crept across a shadowed face. Every flicker of the dim light caused it to ripple, as if it were not entirely solid, but made of darkness itself. The attic seemed to breathe around him. Shadows on the walls shifted independently, curling toward the mirror, forming fleeting shapes, jagged silhouettes, twisted forms, and thick low-floating clouds of black mist that swirled unpredictably. He could hear faint whispers emanating from the corners of the room, echoing his own thoughts, twisting them into fear. Every step he considered taking made the floorboards groan like a chorus of sighs. The figure remained frozen, yet alive, pressing into him with a presence so heavy it seemed to warp the air around him. His reflection in the mirror no longer resembled himself. Eyes hollow, lips curled into a subtle but unmistakable grin, mirroring not his expression, but something far darker. Time stretched. The longer he stared, the more the figure seemed to advance without moving, closing in, calling its darkness around him like thick smoke. He wanted to scream, to run, to destroy the mirror, but every instinct told him he was already trapped. The air grew colder, heavier, almost tangible, pressing against his chest as though the attic itself conspired with the shadow to hold him there. By now, the figure had become more than a reflection. It was the embodiment of the photo's creeping dread, a manifestation of every shadow that had been slowly inching closer, night after night. It was patient, watching, and waiting for the exact moment he realized he wasn't facing it. He was already surrounded. He backed toward the attic door, heart hammering, lungs tight. Every instinct screamed to run, but as he glanced around, panic gripped him tighter than fear ever had. Every reflective surface betrayed him. The mirror had been only the beginning, windows glimmered with dark shapes, spoons on a dusty table caught fleeting glimpses of the figure, even his phone screen reflected the shadow, grinning subtly. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was an omnipresent presence, lurking behind him, advancing without moving. His eyes darted to every corner of the room, thick black fog-like clouds floated low, jagged forms shifted along the walls, towering dark silhouettes hovered midair, dense swirling mist clusters pulsed with a sinister rhythm, all moving unpredictably. The attic seemed alive. Floorboards creaked under invisible weight, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding in unnatural sync. Every flicker of light brought new horrors into view, shadowy tendrils, abstract monstrous shapes, and thick black entities that twisted and stretched, partially mimicking him, partially independent, all pressing a suffocating dread into the space. His breath came in ragged gasps. The whispering started again, soft, high-pitched, indecipherable, but unmistakably taunting. His own reflection winked, smiled, and then tilted its head in impossible angels, mocking him. Panic surged as he realized there was no escape. No matter where he looked, the figure was always there, lurking behind every surface, always closer, always watching. Even the air felt heavy, vibrating with malevolent intent. Mist rose from the floor, coiling around his ankles like tendrils, carrying faint, distorted echoes and laughter that seeped into his bones. Every movement he attempted to flee only seemed to draw the shadow closer, tightening its invisible grip, feeding off his terror. By now, he could feel the presence pressing on his back, crowding the space, warping the attic. He had become part of the shadows, another element in the room's living darkness. And still, the figure in every reflection grinned, patient, eternal, omnipresent, waiting for the exact moment his courage would break completely. He ran through the house, heart pounding. The floor creaked under his frantic steps, but the figure always stayed one step behind, silent, patient. No matter how fast he moved, no matter how many doors he slammed shut, it was there. Watching, waiting. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze with no way out. His breath came in ragged gasps, but still, it followed. It was always there, just a few feet behind him, its presence heavier than any sound, colder than the air itself. And then, in the mirror above the staircase, it smiled. A grin too wide, too wrong. His heart skipped a beat as the reflection slowly twisted its mouth into something monstrous. He realized too late, the shadow wasn't just following him. It was him. The smile in the mirror stretched wider, and in that moment, he understood he was never running from something. He was running from himself. He moved into the new apartment, excited for a fresh start. His roommate seemed perfect, polite, quiet, always smiling. But after a few days, things felt wrong. The roommate never left the house, never ate, never slept. Yet every time he came home, he was there sitting in the same spot, that same smile on his face. Sometimes at night, he heard footsteps in the hallway even when the roommate's door was locked. He tried to ignore it. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right about his roommate. Days passed, but something felt wrong. No one else ever mentioned his roommate, not the neighbors, not even the landlord. Whenever someone visited, they'd talk like he lived alone. But the roommate was always there, quiet, watching. Sometimes, he'd catch movement in the corner of his eye, a shadow that disappeared the moment he turned. And late at night, he could feel it, eyes on him, steady, unblinking, even when he was completely alone. The roommate ate, slept, and whispered constantly, but no one else ever saw him. Meals vanished from the kitchen as if he'd eaten alone, yet the plates were clean and empty. At night, the whispers grew louder, soft at first, like someone talking under their breath, then sharper, more demanding, sometimes mocking. He could feel them crawl across his skin, lingering in the corners of the room. Sometimes, when he looked directly, the roommate was gone, but the shadows remained, moving unnaturally, as if listening, waiting, plotting. And he knew, deep down, these whispers were never friendly. He tried talking to friends, asking if they had seen his roommate. They all insisted no one else lived there. Panic set in. Every creak, every whisper made him jump. The apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in trapped. He realized, with growing dread, that he might never be alone again, and whatever was with him wasn't human. At night, the roommate would move closer, step by step. Every mirror reflected him, but no one else could see him. Sometimes, he'd catch movement in the corner of his eye, shadows stretching, twisting unnaturally. Something about this presence was wrong, very wrong. It wasn't just a person, or even a roommate. It was alive in ways he couldn't understand, watching, waiting, and getting closer. Finally, he realized the horrifying truth: the roommate was not human. Not human, and he was not alone. Something else had moved in with him, a presence that lingered in the corners, whispered in shadows, and watched from every reflective surface. It wanted him. The apartment was no longer a home, it was a trap. And whatever this thing was, it wouldn't let him leave. That was the end of episode 32 of Dynamic Dark. If you enjoyed these terrifying stories, make sure to comment below which story scared you the most. The best comment will be pinned by me, Aditya. So, don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications bell if you dare to see what comes next. And share with your friends and family too. Or you can suggest a topic for the next episode, like a foreign urban legend, haunted place, or any other creepy horror story. The suggestion with the most likes might be featured in the next episode. Until then, keep listening to terrifying stories, because we'll be back soon with episode 33. And in the next episode, we'll bring you creepypasta horror stories. Yes, an English episode this time. Stay tuned and keep watching the horror episodes of Dynamic Dark. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new horror episode. New fears, new darkness, and new secrets. Join the dynamic dark family with 3 brand new terrifying stories.